every time, the first time they see it, they're just, oh my gosh, that is awesome. And then, that sparks the curiosity. Well, let's try another color.
Hello, print friends, and welcome to the 97th episode of Pine Copper Lime, the internet's #1 printmaking podcast. I'm your host, Miranda Metcalf. I release podcasts with people in the print world who are doing something a bit beyond the expected. So please subscribe on your podcast listening app of choice. You can also find Pine Copper Lime on Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, and you can find it all at pinecopperlime.com. We also have a Patreon page where supporters can join at tiers that start at just $1 a month, and that really helps us to keep bringing you printmaking content every week. You can also get thank yous like stickers, prints, and mugs, as well as access to bonus content, which is Shop Talk with our editor, Timothy Pauschak. Quick and dirty tips and tricks with our guests from processes, materials, business advice, and general studio nonsense. So if that sounds like something you're interested in, you can check out a link in the show notes and sign up to hear Tim's chat with today's guest. And if you want to save a little cash while still supporting PCL, you can now sign up for a yearly subscription and save 15% off the tier price. Printmaking forever, shun the non-believers. Pine Copper Lime is brought to you by Speedball Art Products, who've been offering a diverse range of high-quality products to your practice since 1997. Products like their line of professional screen printing tools. Speedball believes professional-grade quality doesn't have to ruin your budget. Their aluminum squeegees, scoop coaters, and high mesh count screens are perfectly suited to outfit your workspace without changing your books from black to red. So, if you want to upgrade your space from hobbyist to pro, head on over to Speedball's website to see where you can pick up your new favorite setup. There's a link in the show notes. This episode of Pine Copper Lime is also brought to you by McLean's Printmaking Supplies, who've been dedicated to the art and artists of relief printmaking since 1979. Their small team of specialists in the Pacific Northwest is the leading supplier of Japanese relief tools for printmakers in the US and abroad, whose primary purpose is to help you find the materials and support you need to reach your printmaking goals. In addition to their high-quality Japanese carving tools, McLean's has resources like books, DVDs, and a list of information on how to use everything you need to make a woodblock, from barons and blocks to paper and whetstones. So head on over to imcleans.com or follow the link in the show notes to learn something new today. My guest this week is Bud Martin, Head of Research and Development at Speedball Art Products. We'll talk about how he came to ink manufacturing from chemical engineering, tinkering in the shop, and with everything from ceramic glaze to circuit boards, communicating with end users, and safety for art products. So without further ado, sit back, relax, and prepare to do some research with Bud Martin. Hi, Bud. How's it going?
It's wonderful. Glad we could connect.
Yeah, I'm super excited to chat today. You're our definitely our first ink guru we've ever had on the podcast. That's your official title, right? I got that right?
That's scary.
Yeah.
It's on my business card and my lab coat.
Yep, yeah, I'm sure. But before we dive on in to the meat and potatoes of our chat here, would you please introduce yourself and let all the good listeners out there know who you are, where you are, and what you do?
Well, I'm Bud Martin, and I'm the Director of Research and Development with Speedball Art Products. And our factory is located in Statesville, North Carolina, which is just up the interstate about an hour north of Charlotte, North Carolina. And I've been with Speedball 16 years. I'm working in the lab and product development on all of our various lines of products.
Yeah. I just, realized when we were doing research for this episode that I'm really not even entirely sure what that entails. And I'm really excited to actually ask, what do you do? But I also am really curious to hear maybe a little bit of your backstory. How did you get into this line of work? Like did you study chemistry? Were you an artist? Did you just tell us a little bit, kind of, 16 years prior, what happened that you ended up in the role that you have now?
Sure. It's interesting. So I'm a chemical engineer by training, and I was working with a company called Hunt Manufacturing, which actually Speedball was a part of Hunt at that time. Now, I wasn't working on the Speedball product. So that was way back. That was 31 years ago that I moved to North Carolina to work for Hunt. And then about 97, 98, Hunt sold off the Speedball line of artist products. Hunt was primarily kind of office products and some hobby products. And they sold off Speedball, but we were all in the same town there in Statesville. And wow, I think at the peak, Hunt had probably 1,000 employees in Statesville. It was a big operation. And Speedball was a smaller portion of that, and they sold it off. And I continued with Hunt until 2005, four, I guess. And so Speedball was just kind of around the corner. And although my background at that time, I'd been mostly working in plastics and plastic processing and extrusion and forming of plastic parts. But I knew the chemist at Speedball and knew a lot of the management team at Speedball and decided a little over 16 years ago, I would start there. So, but with really no art background, no, at least in the visual arts, no ink training. So I was really fortunate that there's a gentleman named Al Spizzo who had worked for Hunt and probably started in the early 70s and really did a lot of the groundwork and development work on all of the inks and paints that we manufactured. And he was, I guess when I started, he had already retired and was just working a couple of days a week. So I was just, attaching myself to the hip of his hip, spending time in the lab and working through formulations and customer inquiries and, kind of started from there and did get some training in formulation, outside of Speedball at a university. But, most of it came from, just working in the lab day to day. We've got folks mixing ink and, as they bring in batches, I'm responsible for the quality of those also. So, learning what things can go wrong and how to correct them when they do go wrong and really understanding, what the artist expects the products to do.
Yeah, well, I can just certainly speak from some of my own experience about how there's nothing really prepares you like on-the-job training for what you're going to do. Like it's, from my side of things, like you go and get a master's degree in art history and then someone tells you you're qualified to work at a gallery and you're like, wait, what?
Right.
This is, I can research, medieval manuscripts, but no one taught me how to sell anything, So it's funny how sometimes you just dive in and you learn as you go, especially if you've got a great mentor. That's a huge boon for sure.
Yeah. And the products, are so much fun to work with.
Yeah.
I tell people, I guess I've worked in manufacturing my whole career, but, nothing's more fun than, manufacturing these products. I'm not making doorknobs or window blinds. I'm sure those are important parts and things that we use too, but it's a lot more fun to interact with artists.
Yeah. Can you tell us a little bit about what does your actual job entail? Are you, I imagine you with a lab coat and binoculars, staring into a massive vat of ink, with a clipboard, but maybe that's not exactly accurate.
Well, there's certainly some of that, although we we sell probably close to 5,000 different products at Speedball.
Right. Yeah.
From, artist papers and calligraphy pens and ceramic pottery wheels and glazes. And really I'm the technical person there. So I can be, working on motors for pottery wheels one minute and trying to figure out what's wrong with the color of a batch of ink the next. And yeah, that's kind of,
Yeah.
I'm kind of a jack of all trades, and master of a couple. I know, and some others I know just enough to be dangerous with. So, I'm responsible for, all of the quality of all those components, and have a good, I have a chemist that works for me and a technician in the lab who's doing a lot of the testing on a day-to-day basis of the batches. So we have, 3 full-time and one who does it part-time, people who are making ink all day long, 5, sometimes 6 days a week. So a number of batches come into the lab every day. And so really, early on, because there are certain chemical properties of the inks that we make, the pH, the viscosity, and the color. But we also test them exactly as the artist would use them. Well, a traditional artist would use them. So if we're making a relief printing ink, then we're going to bring it into the lab and check those, parameters for color and viscosity and pH and do some simulated aging tests to make sure it's going to be stable over time. But then we're going to print it. And we're going to print it three times because we want to print it and have it rolled out on the glass and make sure that it's not going to dry too fast or take too long to dry. And so we'll print it again, and then we'll print it over another color. So we'll do at least 3 prints from every batch of ink that we make.
Well, I'm just so curious. What are you printing? Do you have like one woodcut or lino cut that you use over and over?
Well, so, that's really that's kind of the interesting part. So, I've, carved my own blocks.
Oh, fun.
Or we'll make our own screens. So really early on, and I'll say, going back probably, 13 years ago or so, I knew more about the products and how to use them than anybody within Speedball. So I've kind of at that time became, I would go all over the world doing demos, not anything fancy, but, we sell to a lot of schools, school distributors, and art stores. So I would go, do a 1-hour training session with store employees at a shop in Norway or Ireland, or, and I really enjoyed that. But it became, I needed to be in the lab developing inks. But I did get a really good background in how the inks are expected to perform and went to some classes. I went to a week at Penland School of Crafts, just screen printing almost round the clock for a week, and just learning tips and tricks from professionals. And then, eventually really as social media kind of grew, started meeting a lot of the artists, and a lot of them, you've had on your on your podcast, but started meeting them. And I remember, the first couple of Southern Graphics shows, I would go by myself and set up a booth, a Speedball booth, and that's really how I met a number of the artists. So then it kind of snowballed. We started establishing relationships, and now we have, demo artists, and we have our professional network of artists that we work with. So, we utilize them much more now for those type of outreach, projects and working with our customers to get them trained on the product.
And is that kind of, you mentioned earlier something about like meeting the expectations that artists have. And what does that feedback process sort of look like? Like, are you opening salty emails from people? Is it the demo artist who might say things like, how does that relationship look?
Well, it was early on. All of those emails came to me.
Lucky you.
With product, product questions, whether they were, quality problems, or how do I use this, or how can I get this to dry faster, or this is sticking, not, printing properly. And so I would manage a lot of those. And that was really early on via email. And since then, we've got a number of other folks trained to respond, particularly to product reviews on big art distributors, Dick Blick, or at Amazon, or social media. But every once in a while, they still have to come to me if it's something that has not been addressed before. And some of that was difficult work, managing some of those. But the ones that were my favorite is when an artist would call and say, "What happens if?" Because artists are always looking for their niche, their creative way to print, or a process that they want to utilize products not really the way they were intended to be used. So those are really some of my favorite, and really learned a lot through that. And in some cases, I would say, give me an hour and I'll call you back, and I would go try it in the lab myself. In some cases, it's, wow, I have no idea, but I'll send you a sample if you'll let me know how it turns out.
Yeah. Can you think of any examples of an artist who kind of stumped you with a question of how to use a product?
It's usually the really absurd questions, that, I got one a couple of weeks ago that kind of threw me off, and I don't really know. It was kind of through email, but, they were asking if one of our printmaking inks was microwavable. And I thought, I mean, I can only envision that they were printing some nice, towels for the kitchen. They might wrap their bread in and stick it in the oven or something. I don't know.
That's so funny. I was imagining they wanted to microwave it before they used it.
Yeah. I don't know.
I was trying to think about how, because sometimes if you're getting really out there with art making or in other ways, you might be working with something that you need to heat up for some reason, and then what you put on it needs to match that heat. I don't know, I'm thinking of glass blowers and that kind of thing. Who knows?
Right,
yeah.
Right. Well, other than we have a couple that are metallic, which actually have metallic pigment in, so those definitely don't want to go in the microwave. But I ended up printing something and letting it dry, and draping it over a plastic cup and full of water and putting it in the microwave for a couple of minutes just to confirm. But I was pretty sure it was going to be fine.
Yeah, I love that so much of your job is actually just that really, I don't know, just hands-on experimenting. I mean, almost in a way that I feel you often think about a scientist in a cartoon or something, but that scientists don't necessarily actually get to do. But you're actually running, someone asks a question and you need to go find out the answer,
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Well, I'm curious, usually it's, sparks some curiosity. I'm thinking, they're probably the only person who would ever ask me that question. And in the long term, it probably, we don't have to have a suitable answer. But now I'm curious. I want to find out.
Yeah, I bet. So is there a really sort of unexpected part of your job that when people might not predict that someone in research and development, in an art supplies company would have to engage in? Is there anything like that?
Yeah. So this one is really weird. So we have grown since I started through some new product development, but also through some acquisitions. We've purchased some other businesses. So, certainly people are surprised that I would be working on, a circuit board for a pottery wheel. The same time I'm, testing watercolor paper. But we bought this company out of Houston, and they primarily sold metal leafing. gold leaf, silver leaf, and the adhesives and all the supplies that go with it. So again, I was the only one, who was testing the product and using the product and, leaping some things myself. So when it came time to repackage it and start putting the Speedball brand on it, I was the hand model on all of that packaging. So, that's kind of bizarre to walk through a crafts chain and see, my name on not my name, just my hands on the packaging. Or we did, a DVD. And so we did some videos, and I did all the demonstrations in the early videos of screen printing and relief printing. And so I decided, well, I'm going to do this print of my nephew. So, that print is on the back of the DVD that we, of course now everything's streaming, but the funniest was there was a product that we have, and my hands were on the package, but a big customer decided they wanted to put their name on the package. So it's my artwork that I made, but they photoshopped a nice young woman's flawless hands holding the piece on the package. So they knew their target market wasn't a middle-aged man who was starting to get some age spots.
Oh, that's too bad. That's so much less honest,
Yeah.
That's super
so I have both packages, the original and the new.
Yeah.
Just because I think it's such a funny story.
I love that. I got curious a little bit earlier when you were talking about sort of testing actually the quality of a batch of ink. And it seems, and I think about that because, of course, you think, like you said, you talked about it drying, and you talked about, you want to make sure that it rolls out right and it dries at the right time and it has all these different qualities. I'm also curious, though, about color because, of course, matching color, tube to tube, jar to jar is really essential. That's, you could, if you got that wrong, you could really ruin someone's day.
Right.
And so how does that actually happen? How do you know that it's the same as it was before? I'm sure you can, look and see and make a guess, but do you have a computer, an AI like HAL who can zoom in and measure it, or how does that actually happen?
Well, we do. To go back just a little bit, we do keep retained samples of every batch that we make. And of course we batch code every tube or can or jar of ink that we make. So if there is a question or concern about a batch, we keep those for at least 2 years, so I can go back and look at those. So, if I look in, a particular ink cabinet, there could be 50 batches sitting in there, but we'll keep one jar in there as our standard. So, and it's really, we've looked at, spectrophotometers and things, but we're still doing it by the naked eye. And so we draw down, we have a little bar that lays down a specific thickness of ink. And so we draw down that standard versus the production batch and draw them down and, look at them in the wet state. And then, sometimes inks dry differently than they look wet. So,
right.
We wait till it dries and make sure that, that color matches up pretty close. So, but it is, we are doing it with the naked eye.
Does that ever sort of seep into your day-to-day life in an unexpected way? And sort of, for example, what I mean by that is working at an art gallery. If I go into someone's house, if one of their pictures is the least bit crooked, it's the only thing I can look at. And so is it sort of if someone has repainted their wall and it doesn't quite match, do you have to stare at it when you're having a job where you're really looking at color so particularly as a big part of it, and then going out into the world, does that have kind of unexpected consequences?
No, I wouldn't say once I go out into the world. Certainly, in day-to-day work, I mean, it is certainly something that we, pay attention to and, have to, if somebody, we're humans and they're humans out there making the batch.
Mm-hmm.
And if for some reason I overshot that by, a half an ounce of black, well, wow, and a little bit of black goes a long way.
Yeah.
So sometimes it's like, okay, the only way we're going to be able to fix this now is to make another batch and not put any black in it. And then, mix those two together. So we have lab mixers and lab mills that we do all of the development work on, but also, correcting batches. So, if there's one that looks like, okay, this one's going to take a little more effort to fix, then we just, stop the production on it and bring samples in the lab and start working on it in the lab to find out, exactly what we're going to need to add, whether it's for color or some other, property of the ink that didn't meet the standard.
Is there ever a point where you just have to kind of like call it like a surgeon, where you're like, this batch is just not going to make it?
Yeah, you're like, okay, we've spent enough time. We spent 2 days trying to fix this batch, and it's not going to happen. And it, gets disposed of. Yeah. That doesn't happen too often. We usually have some, a few tricks and things that we can do, but especially if there was a major error, like I grabbed the wrong orange pigment. Wow. That doesn't match at all. There's no way we can do anything with that.
Right.
Or what can we turn? Is there anything that's closer to that we could turn it into? So we have 30 colors. So sometimes you think, okay, well, if I add just a little bit of this, then I can turn it into another color.
Yeah. And how big of batches get made at a time?
Traditional batches around 60 gallons.
Oh, wow.
And then some of the, really odd colors, we may make 15 gallons, but traditional batch is about 60 gallons. So, and we, make, of course, black and white are the big ones, so we may set up and make, 10 batches of black, over a couple of days.
Do you ever find that what color you're working on affects your mood at all? Like, do you feel really kind of gothic and somber after 10 batches of black and really chipper after a lime green?
No, my technician that may be a question for him because he's the one looking at every batch. I kind of only get, pulled into it if there's an issue. It's mostly, there are some colors that are, historically been difficult. So as soon as I see them making that one, it's more of, oh no, keeping my fingers crossed.
Like what makes a difficult color? Yeah.
Well, some of them are when, you mix multiple pigments. Mm-hmm. So, if we're making a turquoise, water soluble block printing ink, where we've got a blue, maybe a green, a yellow, and a white all in there, that's when it gets tricky.
Yeah, I could definitely see that.
Most of the ones, like our professional, the professional relief ink, those are all single pigments. So really, I mean, colors, unless we got some, a bad pigment from a pigment manufacturer, we never have problems. I'm going to knock on wood while I say it. We never have problems with color on those inks. It's usually the ones that have multiple pigments.
I've always wondered, what makes a color a good color? And sort of what I mean by that is sometimes I'll be out in the world and I'll see something and I'll be like, yes, that is a great green. What a beautiful green that is. Or I'll be looking at a work of art and I'll be drawn to the yellow in it and I'll be like, man, that's a beautiful yellow. And within a color range, at least for me, there's certain variants within that color that really just pop or make me feel something or give me that aesthetic pleasure. Have you thought about why that is?
No, because I think it's such a personal preference. Certainly there are colors that, each time they run, I'm like, oh, I love that color. And it has nothing to do with the formulation or, the ease of manufacturing that color. It's just that, there are certain colors that to me, are really appealing. And I think sometimes when I look at it, I'm thrown back to like when I was really young and had that box of crayons, it was like, I think maybe you're influenced really young as to what, and of course, when you're young, everybody's like, what's your favorite color?
Yeah.
Nobody asks me that now, what's your favorite color? It's just something that as a child, like they ask you, how old are you? And what's your favorite color?
What do you want to be?
And nobody asks those questions
I
anymore.
actually
But I think
what's your favorite color written out as a question for you. So, Bud, what is your favorite color?
When I see it in the lab, not that I would wear it or paint my room, but purple.
Yeah.
Love purple.
I love purple too. Like, do you have like within purple, is it more of like a kind of a royal or a lavender or anything on the spectrum?
It's more of kind of a real deep purple.
Yeah.
Not real deep purple, clean.
Mm-hmm.
No white in it. Just a real clean, deep purple.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that deep purple was one of the colors that historically in Western Europe that only royalty could wear.
Sure.
Because it was seen, as powerful and difficult to, the plants or bugs or whatever they used, to dye the clothes was really rare. And so it was like only reserved for royalty to wear a purple. It's a powerful color. It's a good one.
Right.
Do you have a least favorite one? Do you have one where you're just like, get out of my lab?
Brown. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'd say brown, at least for printmaking. Well, I mean, some of the sepias I like those colors in prints, but brown doesn't really fire me up.
I'm wondering because like I know people will have a lot of sort of debate around maybe sort of like safety in inks, and there's like oil-based or water-based kind of like safer for the body or,
Sure.
to work with. Do you have any insights for that to kind of, settle those debates?
Well, yeah, that's a good question. And well, I don't know if I'll settle any debates, but I may have a perspective. And it's interesting you bring that up because I'm on the board of a manufacturers group called, the acronym is ACMI, for the Art and Creative Materials Institute. And it started, I don't know, maybe 70 years ago. And it was really focused on safety in art products. And there are about 200 manufacturers around the world who are members. And they actually worked to get some legislation put in the, I'm going to say 70s. It was called the Labeling of Hazardous Art Materials Act.
Mm-hmm.
And so it really ensures that if there are hazards with an art product, that they are labeled correct, with appropriate warnings. So every one of our formulas, we have to send to a toxicologist, and, they determine whether that product is going to require any hazard labeling and what the wording has to be. And, as we expand our distribution, we ship to about 60 countries around the world. And so we are starting to send more to Europe. So we have to make sure that they meet the European regulations and have appropriate warnings. Same with Canada. Some of their warnings, or they have specific regulations for certain chemicals. So, our goal, we've always been really strong in the schools. Mm-hmm. So Al Spizzo, I mentioned earlier, he really developed a lot of these water-based products, years ago that were much safer and much easier for teachers and students to use and to clean up. And it's a challenge. I mean, oil-based or solvent-based paints and inks really have some nice properties, mm-hmm. And trying to achieve those types of results with the water was, certainly a water-based product was certainly a challenge, early on, that, Al was able to figure out, because we want to get children started, printmaking, have a, positive experience early on. And if they can, just clean up their supplies with a little soap and water, that's certainly better than having them, sniff solvents.
Yeah.
We do offer an oil-based line of ink. It's, not as popular, but I think there's a need for it. You can produce certain results, and people in the right environment, with ventilation, and can use those products fairly safe. Disposing of the rags and the waste solvent and things like that, can get a little bit tricky. So we try to focus on the water-based products, but it is it just like, and we're also, we're not using any heavy metals. There's no lead, there's no cadmium. We're staying away from those. I mean, years and years ago they did, and some of those make for some wonderful colors. Lead white, was really popular years and years ago. So I think primarily we're focused on water-based, and trying to and the new water miscible, they're a soy-based. The professional relief inks are a soy-based, but
really?
It's emulsified. Yeah, but it's emulsified so that you can clean it up with soap and water.
It is interesting how it's, I don't know, it seems like in art making, as in life, the more dangerous or problematic elements also tend to be like really fun and effective too.
Sure.
It just seems to be like a rule with life, and and I know that there's a huge variety throughout the world of what people use in their studio and what they consider safety and standard, and everything from we were. My husband and I were living in Sydney for a while, and, the health and safety standards there are really, really high, and, like no nitric at all or something like that in the studio. And then you go here to Thailand and you've got kids, smoking in the acid room, right? Like with their shoes off, So
it's crazy. I was in India, and we were in a printmaking studio, and, they had the acid, and I looked up at the ceiling fan and it had metal blades, and they were just like deteriorating. And I'm like, oh my gosh, these people are breathing this. It's just ridiculous.
Yeah. Yeah. And so it's a really, it's funny because I think it also, at least in Thailand, I can kind of speak to like, you see that if they say maybe like the lack of nannying, or just like that personal freedom with, you're taking your life into your own hands, you'll see it like, we'll be waiting outside the restaurant for motorbike taxis to show up, and you'll see some guy at 11 at night up on like a bamboo ladder that's leaned against a pole with no one else around, who's using a welder, just putting his hand over his eyes, like, like, no cones to like, block anyone from walking underneath the sparks. So anyway, it's one of the really fascinating things about culture sort of throughout the world, is that you get these really huge extremes, and then you of course you hear our printmaking elders talk about, oh yeah, you just reach your hand right into the acid bath to grab what you needed, like it'd be fine.
Yeah. Or I love that smell of that oil-based inks.
Yes.
I hear that from the traditionalist, and I think in working through ACMI, we just we understand that there's a breadth of products, but we as manufacturers, our responsibility is to make sure that we warn you on any of the hazards before you use the product. And we have to have safe materials or safety data sheets to list information or recommended personal protective equipment and things like that. We just our responsibility is just let you know if if there's a hazard, we tell you what it is.
Absolutely. Yeah. And then it's out in the world, and it's in each consenting adult's hands to
Right.
do what they will with the information. Absolutely. No,
Sure.
it is, my grandmother, my mother's mother, was a printmaker, and she had some health problems later in life that my mother thinks had to do with, being in print studios, in the 1950s and the 1960s. And so, it is something that I think that people, we joke about a lot, but like I've seen the real world consequences, that it doesn't happen to everyone, but it could happen to some people. So things, of course,
Sure.
are much, much, much safer now. And as you said, like, people are much more informed now. But, I used to work next to a glass blowing studio, and I was chatting with one of the blowers there, and I remember he said that, that they get their own particular kind of cancer in their respiratory system from glass dust after years.
Oh, sure. That silica can be very dangerous.
Yeah. Yeah. So, artists are craftspeople, and they have job hazards, like anyone who's out there dealing with materials and building things. And yeah, but luckily, as you say, I think that we're in a much better position now to be informed and to be safe than we were certainly, 60 years ago.
Yeah, and as manufacturers, we have to worry about that too, because you bring up silica, which we use in our glazes. So, I mean, although our products in their complete finished package most of the time don't require any hazard labeling. They're in a liquid form, so they can't breathe, the liquid silica. But the people who are making our ink, that we need to wear, respirators at certain times, and dust mask for other materials. So because some of those are, in their 100% form, it can be very dangerous.
Yeah, I didn't even think of that. But of course, for the manufacturers, for the people who spend their, entire careers around the everything in its raw form, that's definitely something that, at least thankfully, we've gotten a lot better at protecting the makers as well,
Right.
I think, and valuing those people's health and safety as well. Yeah.
Sure.
I'm picturing the ink manufacturing floor now, and it kind of looks like Chernobyl, like that old HBO series to me. I see people in these these hazmat suits, and I also am just sort of curious, because I know that you do many things, but I think that ink, and it sounds like, as someone who makes prints yourself, that's maybe something that's particularly exciting for you as well, and particularly exciting for the dear Pine Copper Lime listeners. What for you gets you really jazzed about making ink? Is there an element of it that's just particularly exciting, or that you really look forward to, or is particularly satisfying about the actual process of being involved in making the product?
Well, I think my first thought was going to when I, demonstrated the product, the use of the product, or we may have, a group of school children come through for a tour, and we will demonstrate, the how the products are used, or and I think there's certainly particularly in screen printing, when they pull that screen and lift it, there's always like, oh, wow. As soon as they look at it and see that they've, transferred the ink to the paper, there's that aha moment, or just a sheer joy, or, magic that seems to happen. And almost every time, the first time they see it, and they're just, oh my gosh, that is awesome kind of thing. And then, that sparks the curiosity. Well, let's try another color, or let's mix these two together and see what happens, So I do particularly enjoy sharing that with younger folks.
Yeah. I've been lucky enough to screen print with kids sometimes, and it's just, and once they get the sense that they can just make as many as they want, then they're so keen to just blow through a stack of paper and a batch of ink as quickly as they can. And it's just so much fun to see that that spark. And I love it. I love it. Future printmakers out there of the world unite. I think it's a really beautiful thing.
Examining prints, I'm always like, how did they get that? How did they do that? Because and trying to figure out those things is interesting. I don't necessarily think like I'm kind of process oriented, but I don't really think like a printmaker, and I can't, stacking layers of colors on top of each other, and that doesn't necessarily come real easy to me. But I enjoy trying to figure out how an artist or a printer achieved a certain look.
Yeah. I think that's one of the real joys of being involved in printmaking too, is really staring at, especially when you see the prints in real life. It can be really difficult to do if you're just looking at something on Instagram. But when you get to see an exhibition or get to go to an open portfolio like at Southern Graphics, seeing like, oh, wow, like, especially if you're doing like a reduction relief carving, and like, that's how you got that purple right there, that dark blue, as you combine those two. And it's just really, really satisfying to try and unravel that magic a little bit in printmaking. Is a beautiful side of what we get to do. Yeah,
I think early on, I think it happens to a lot of the folks who are at Speedball. I know there's some naive or don't understand, but I mean, I didn't really realize until I went to a workshop my own trying to learn that, well, nobody is using this ink right out of the jar, especially in screen printing. They're always mixing it with something else and creating their own color. And so you go in these shops, and there's hundreds of jars of, pre-mixed ink left over from other jobs. But it's all, they're blending and mixing everything. I mean, unless it's straight up black.
Yeah. Unless it's that key plate, key screen. Other than that, with the screen printers, of course, because color is such an incredible part of that medium, that they get very, very creative and make absolutely beautiful concoctions, for sure.
No, I was just thinking, and then that's when the experimentation comes, and they're crossing over into other products. I mean, I've screen printed adhesive and put flocking on, prints before. So just really, unique things that artists do to make their mark.
Well, beautiful. And so do you, I usually towards the end of the recording ask my guests like where they can be found and followed on social media and that kind of thing. Do you keep a social media presence at all that you'd want people to reach out to you on or follow you on?
Yeah, it's most. I mean, I'm friends with a lot of artists. I do have an Instagram account. I do have a Facebook account. I'd say the Instagram's more, kind of interesting things. I do keep them separate. Facebook is more family things, but Instagram, I was posting stuff. Just I 2 or 3. I'm like, I'm going to start a series on this. Just things I've found at Speedball, just interesting, because it is our manufacturing process. We do a lot of things there, and so you would just see these old tools. I mean, we've got old equipment. We're knocking out these calligraphy pens that we've been making, since the late 1800s. And the equipment's not that old, but some of it is, certainly from 1930s or 40s, I bet. And so you just see all this kind of custom things, and so I would post some just kind of random pictures of things that I thought was interesting. It's people love to take a tour because they it's just, especially artists, because they're always just blown away to what they see. Wow, these are real people touching every bag of chemical that goes in every batch of ink, and these are the people who are testing it. And of course, we have prints, everywhere in the offices, and my office is full of Sean's Star Wars because he's one of my favorites.
Yeah, beautiful. Well, what's that Instagram account? Where can people follow you for that?
Oh, I think I think my name on there is Butteroo.
Cute.
You might see pictures of me, smoking cigars or a Burning Man on there too. But you might enjoy this.
Exactly. The rich spectrum of the life of an ink chemist. I like it.
Right.
Excellent. Well, beautiful. Well, thanks so much, Bud, for your time and just your generosity. Sure. It's been super fun to learn just more about what goes into it and all of it. I think that printmakers are just such lovely nerds about printmaking, and I very much include myself in that. So, they get so excited just talking about, not just the finished product, but the process and the ink and the paper. And so I think that they'll really enjoy hearing behind the curtain a little bit. Well, that's our show for this week. Join me again next week when my guest will be Alan Edmonds, founder and director of Brandywine Workshop and Archives. We'll talk about doing something bigger than yourself, being a citizen of the world, databases, and nonprofits. You won't want to miss it. This episode, like all episodes, was written and produced by me, Miranda Metcalf, with editing by Timothy Pauschak and music by Joshua Weber. I'll see you next week.